The world suddenly twisted and shifted, molding itself back to a simple study room that it had once been. The glowing dust had fallen and the ceiling faded, leaving no trace of ever been there. Twilight light and Spike stared in absolute shock at the sight they had witnessed, at the last words had been spoken. Twilight, was he talking to you? Spike asked, confused, not sure if that was what he just saw. I think so, but how was that possible? That wasn't happening right now, and that had happened a long time ago, before I was even close to being born. Twilight's mind was reeling, her eyes moving around frantically as she tried to gather her thoughts into one place. Was the magical documentation of the events that occurred? Is it possible to record events like this? And if so, who had placed a specific event in this box? Why would it be made for me to find it in this crazy mess? Twilight then spoke quickly and bewildered. I don't even think it was one of those things. Maybe it was a memory from the past. That Merlin guy did say the memory was the key, Spike said, trying to think about it. A memory, Twilight thought to herself. But then whose memory was it, Spike? I guess it'd be Celestia's memory, or maybe Luna's. They were both present in that event, Spike thought, scratching his head. Well, he and I had to find the rest. I guess that means there must be more memories hiding, like this one as it was. Twilight examined the box, finding the contents now empty. With no need of an empty box, placed it around the back of the table. Hey, your medallion wasn't making noise anymore, Spike noticed, trying to listen any for the sound. Oh, you're right, Spike. Twilight lifted the medallion with her hoof to look at it, confirming that it had gone silent. It must be okay to wander outside again, since it was still buzzing when we got in here. Twilight walked over to the door, put her hoof against it. Let's try and hurry up and find those last two puzzle pieces, Spike, and get into the back room. I have a feeling something very important is back there. How can you tell? Spike asked curiously. Like I said, Spike, whatever is going on following its own rules, this includes the puzzle, the monsters, and the things like in the memory we just found. Something important's locked inside the back room, or else it wouldn't be locked. Twilight nodded, taking a deep breath and opening the study room once more. The dark library came into view once more, and she realized her pendant had turned itself off in the study room. With a quick tap of her hoof, and the light had returned, she could see in the dark library. She scanned the area around quickly, finding no monsters waiting for an ambush. It seemed as if the creature had simply walked by and left them alone. Twilight quickly pulled the map back out and examined it. Okay, the last two pieces are actually nearby. They're that way, Twilight said, looking to her left, before quietly closing the study room door behind her and following along the wall. She scanned with her light down the aisles and the bookshelves she had passed, stopping when she saw the blue light book sticking out of one of the nearby shelves. Without moving from the wall, she gasped at the magic and levitated above herself. The title of the book read Heaven's Food. She did a quick glance around to make sure no monster was near and listened carefully to her medallion before she opened the book of what read contained. Once there were two sisters, whom had no children and was rich. The other one has 5 children and was a widow, and so poor that she no longer had food to satisfy herself and her children. In her need before, she went to her sister and said, My children and I are suffering from the greatest hunger, though art rich. Give me a mouthful of bread. The very rich sister was as hard as a stone, said, I have myself and I have nothing in the house, and drove away the poor creature with harsh words. After some husband of the rich sister came home and was about to cut himself a piece of bread, but that is when he made the first cut of the load out of flowered red blood. When the woman saw that she was terrified and had told him what occurred, he hurried away to help the widow and her children. But when he entered the room, he found her bowed. She had her 2 youngest children in her hooves, and the 3 eldest were lying dead. He offered her food, but she was answered, For earthly food we have no longer any desire. Heaven has already satisfied the hunger of 3 of us, and will hearken to our expectations likewise. Scarcely had uttered these words, those the little ones drew to their last breaths, whereupon her heart broke and she sank down dead. Can the wait and read Twilight wait till later, Twilight? I like to finish our business here as quickly as possible, Spike said, trying to get Twilight's nose out of another book. Alright, sorry, Spike. Twilight vanished a book in her magic and continued following the wall. Each study door she passed continued to be broken and boarded off. The map showed that the last two pieces of the puzzle was in each of one of the study rooms in the middle of the maze of the bookshelves. Twilight's light had scanned down the aisles looking for anything that might jump out at her. The pathway ended when she was stopped by a large pile of books, but led down to another aisle of the bookshelves. She examined the map and looked at the study room that was next to her. The door wasn't broken or boarded up, looking perfectly good for one use. One of the puzzle pieces was contained inside the room. Not wanting to waste any more time, she placed her hoof against the door and gently pushed it open slightly. Her medallion suddenly began to buzz loudly as the sound of chewing struck her ears. She quickly closed the door and shut, and the buzzing silenced itself. Oh no! Twilight took a deep breath, realizing that she might have to fight another one of those creatures, and opened the door slightly once more. Her medallion began to buzz as she looked through the crack of the door. The room was brightly lit, like the others, and she could spot the creature in its tentacles easily. It was devouring books in the corner of the living room, and the table in the opposite side of the wall to save room. She saw the tentacles floating around on its back, looking for some prey to stab into. Her eyes then moved onto the table, spotting the puzzle piece laying on top of it. She thought about her actions for a moment, before having a brilliant deduction. She had lit her room with her magic horn, and the puzzle piece covered in the distance with her magic. The creature feasting stopped for a moment, if noticing her use of magic. Twilight softly gulped and vanished the piece into her magic, before closing the door. The medallion continued to buzz for a moment or two after the door closed, causing Twilight to softly sweat in having the idea of being discovered. However, the buzzing grew quiet, and she let out a sigh in relief, realizing that she'd gotten away with it. Thank you, Merlin. Your spells has worked as miracle today, Twilight thought to herself. She turned around and walked away from the door, leading to the center of the library now. According to the map, the puzzle piece should be right under her nose. At the end of the book aisle, she saw it, sitting on the floor comfortably, surrounded by 3 separate piles of books that had been blocked off another way into the puzzle piece. It was a dead end in the maze, but a dead end that had fed the final piece. With a smile, she whisked the puzzle piece up with her magic and vanished it with it. Alright, we have all the pieces we need, Spike. Let's go and get that door open. Twilight smiled confidently, ready to go to the back room and away from all the monsters. She turned around and made her way back to the wall, planning on going forward back to where the locked puzzle door, putting the pieces into one place. As she began to follow along the wall, she was stopped in her tracks when her medallion suddenly began to buzz once more. She quickly looked down at the aisles and it was right next to her, hearing the sound of groaning coming down from it. From the shadows appeared to be another one of those creatures, only to seem to be different. The tentacles were at the attention, point straight forward, and its head wasn't wobbling back and forth, but instead heading straight forward. It wasn't searching. It knew where its prey was now. The creature let out a screeching wail, charging forward straight an unprepared unicorn. Twilight leaped forward as the tentacles came crashing down, breaking into the wall where she had just been landing. She couldn't stand around it right now. She couldn't stop and fight the thing. With Spike on her back, with nowhere safe, she quickly put him down and she just had to run. She felt like she had run faster than she ever had before. With its world had grown into size, it was all in her mind that she knew, but it felt like the aisles would end. She could hear the creature screeching as it pulled the tentacles out of the wall. It was heading for her once more. Twilight made a sharp turn at the end of the wall. She could hear her breath as her heart began pounding in her ears, one thing constantly shouting out of her head. Spike was in danger. She could feel the baby dragon clinging onto her head tightly, looking back at the creature chasing them. She could feel his panicked breath and his terrified claws, his racing heart. Everything about him wanted to be out of danger quickly, and she was the one who had to protect him. She had to get him out of danger. The door came into view, and the puzzle pieces were still locked into the place where she had placed them before. She could hear the crashing of the books, and the splintering woods began to fall behind her as the creature thrashed its tentacles out, attempting to drive them straight into her body. "Twilight, hurry!" Spike shouted, gripping hold of her mane. Twilight winced in pain, but held back her words, summoning the two pieces of the puzzle out from her magic. With the speed and precaution, she placed the remaining pieces onto the door, hearing it click with the sound of the puzzle being completed. Her magic gripped on the door and forced it open, Twilight sprinting straight for it. The creature wailed as its tentacles missed her by inches, slicing through the air. Twilight had turned and opened the hallway, seeing the creature flail for its food for the door, its skin flapping around as its mandibites smashed around. With her horde lining up, she swung her head and slammed the door shut as hard as she could, the hard echo of the slam being heard throughout the library. The medallion didn't let up its buzzing, and Twilight stepped back from the door, still hearing the creature wail from behind it. It soon died down for a moment, causing an unnatural calm. Twilight gulped softly, not liking the quiet. The door cracked visibly. Something hard was striking against it. Twilight's eyes widened as she realized that the door could be damaged by the creature. Another strike hit the door, loudly splitting the wood that it was made out of. A tentacle burst through the door, heading straight for Twilight. She quickly jumped back and let out a startled scream as it stopped a few feet away from her. The tentacle suddenly began to quiver and ravel. A loud, high-pitched screaming sound was coming from it, as if it was suddenly being attacked. Steam started to rise from the entire appendage as it began to wrinkle and shrink. The creature tried to pull the tentacle back out the door, only for it to fall out of mid-pull. The tentacle then landed on the ground, curling up before vanishing completely in the steam of the smoke that had been produced. Twilight stared in confusion where the tentacle had been, then up at the door, hearing the creature wail and moan behind it. It wailed, and it seemed like a scratch on the door for a minute or two, before giving up and walking away. The buzz in the medallion began to fade as it walked away, before going silent. "What just happened, Twilight?" Spike asked, confused, still writhing from the terror of having been survived by the close encounter. "I don't know, Spike." Twilight gulped softly, looking down at the ground. Her light illuminated the spot where the tentacle had been. She lifted it up to find down the hallway to see what might have caused the tentacle to suddenly fall apart. "Hey, what's that?" Twilight asked, walking closer to the door, spotting a strange marking on the ground. She carefully stopped right before it, illuminating the symbol with her light. "Hey, isn't that the same symbol used from one of the boxes in the library?" Spike asked curiously, looking at the design. "It is, Spike," Twilight spoke softly, looking over at the strange circle design. It was indeed the circle within the circle's design with a cryptic ruined writing. However, it was different. Instead of being a red symbol, this one was blue. "What do you think this thing is being here was to hurt the monster?" "Maybe it was the only thing that makes sense," Spike commented, tapping his chin in thought. "But then who put it there?" Twilight pondered as well. The two of them sat there for about a minute and thought, before Twilight looked back up at the door with a hole in it, leading back to the library. "We can contemplate about it more later, Spike. Let's get into the back room and see what we can find." Twilight spoke firmly, turning around and heading down the narrow hallway. Twilight was a little bit surprised in the back room and at the end of this long, narrow hallway. It seemed unusual for a library to have useless hallways like this within Border's Way, but her light fell upon the door at the end of the hallway. The words "back room" was written onto it. Quickly approaching it, she put her hoof against the door, braced for what might be behind it, and pushed it open. The door let out a creak as she pushed it open. She winced at the sound of it, realizing that it would likely attract anything that was inside the room, though when she looked, she found it to be surprisingly well lit. A few candles were lit around the room, and appeared to be several tables in the center of the room, with a few bookshelves along the back walls. "Oh, hello there," a voice suddenly came out, causing Twilight to nearly jump out of her skin. "I wasn't expecting to meet another pony here." Suddenly a unicorn walked into view from across the room, so one she hasn't seen before. His coat was a light brown, while his mane was striking blonde with a darker blonde lightings going through it evenly. On his face was a pair of glasses that showed off his dark blue eyes, while he had a scruffy goat growing around his mouth and nose. His body was lighter brown sweater with dark brown edges to it, and a white collar that propped up from the sweater. Almost striking was the cutie mark that appeared to be a red circle with a simple cross-square pattern, with a large question mark in the middle of it. He closed the book that he had been reading and levitated gently down to one of the tables. I was here doing research on my latest book, when suddenly things started to grow weird, so I thought I might poke my nose in to do some research. The stallion smiled oddly. Twilight wasn't sure how to read his reaction, but she was grateful to see another pony. Oh, well, I wasn't expecting to see another pony, too, Twilight spoke hesitantly, walking into the room and closing the door behind her. Are you from Stalliongrad? This is the library here, after all. No, I was born in Canterlot, actually, the stallion said, walking closer. I was in Stalliongrad doing research. Tell me, based on your questions on this library has no longer in Stalliongrad, so where am I? You're in Ponyville, Twilight mentioned, the two stopping for a short of each other. Spike was gripping onto Twilight's head, eyeing the new pony with suspicion. My name's Twilight Sparkle. I've been trying to figure out what's going on here. The stallion's face seemed to lit up upon hearing her name. Before smiling his odd smile, Twilight couldn't help but think that he seemed a little off. Twilight Sparkle, the one and only, the student of Princess Celestia and current welder of the element of magic? He's simply fascinated by this information. Twilight went over to open her mouth to respond when Spike did it for her. She's the one and only, all right, but who are you? Spike asked, pointing a finger accusingly. Spike, what are you doing? Twilight glared softly at the baby dragon's rudeness. Now, it's all right, the stallion smiled, adjusting his glasses. I'm certainly not as famous as you may be, Miss Sparkle, but I have started to gain a name for myself. You see, I've published many books here recently, and my ever-growing hunger about more in the world. I love nothing more than to finding answers to the questions that the world brings up. He then chuckled softly to himself, before making sure to look straight into the eyes. My name is Magus Van Darkheart, and it's a pleasure to meet you. Spike practically fell off of Twilight's back. Twilight's jaw felt like it could have hit the ground. There was a moment of stunned shock as Twilight took all this information in. Magus seemed to chuckle softly at her reaction. Oh my, I take it that you've heard of me? She asked, amused. Heard of you? Twilight could barely contain her voice. You're the guy who... You practically caused this mess. Her mind jumped out straight into conclusions. Huh? Magus asked, confused and raising an eyebrow. What do you mean? I certainly would have nothing to do with that, of what is going on in this library. I've been simply just doing research. Well, no, you haven't done anything directly, Twilight said, trying to regain her emotions. But your spell has caused a lot of indirect problems, and it's helped some good ponies too. Twilight bit her lip as she began to realize what she was saying and how she was reacting. I'll start from the beginning, Miss Sparkle. What are you talking about? Magus asked, a little bit more confused than he likes to be. Well, okay, you see, I have some friends who have been having nightmares, so I looked up on a book of dreams and found yours. I used a spell you created called the Mind Well on them to find out what's wrong, Twilight quickly explained. Ah, yes, dreams. A psychological understanding. I remember writing that, Magus mused, rubbing his chin. And Mind Well is personally one of my favorites, and a lot of work went into weaving that spell. I assume it brought your friends problems up front when they were able to confront them? Well, yes and no, Twilight explained, causing Magus to get a little confused again. See, I never saw that their problems were. I saw a floating picture and the spell ended on its own. But when it was over, my friends, they said they'd come to understand their problems and were better with it. You don't say, Magus said once more. This is certainly odd. The spell was never intended to do any of those things. Exactly, so if you're here now, can you tell me? Why did the spell do that? And what reason would my friends have for not telling me they experienced while under the Mind Well? Twilight wanted answers. Magus grew quiet, although in silence. It seemed like it could take a minute or two until he finally responded. I couldn't tell you, Miss Sparkle. He was his answer. I didn't intend for the spell to have effects. and you should have seen the problem was when you cast a spell. He smiled, looking off into the distance. But when this intrigues me now, I'd like to find an answer to question myself. Is it the guy right in the head? Spike asked, a little confused about Migas' words. No, Spike, no need for insulting. Twilight huffed a little bit before turning back. Sorry about such questions in the situation we're in. I never expected to run into you and the olive ponies here. It's all right, Miss Sparkle. Magus nodded slowly. All things must happen for a reason. With the recent phenomenon going on in this library, I've been busy with myself research on it. How can you research something no pony's ever experienced before? Spike asked, confused. By finding clues and hints of this, of course. Magus chuckled softly. Like for you, for instance. Did you know that the monsters have appeared to hate something? It brings them pain and suffering, to simply even be in the vicinity of it. Like the blue circle, Twilight gasped in realization. Oh, excellent. If you saw that on your way in, Magus smiled, adjusting his glasses again. That's exactly why I found this symbol adorned in red while I was researching. The monsters suddenly started showing up, and I knew it couldn't have been a coincidence. So just using my knowledge in runic symbols, I figured it out quickly that changing the color turned the symbol from a positive effect to the creatures into a negative one. He chuckled softly. Of course the symbols has its limitations. Huh? What do you mean? Twilight asked, confused. You see, Miss Sparkle, the symbol runs in a strange system. The monsters hate the symbol in blue, but only in smaller numbers. The more you create, the weaker the effect becomes. I discovered that when I tried to create a wall to stop their movements, but they were just simply able to walk through it. Magus then turned to the back towards over the tables, where his books lay low. But if I were to put a single one in the hallway, then the creature feels its maximum effect. So in short, Magus' horn then lit up, and pulled out several different books from the shelves around him. He piled them neatly into a small structure in front of him. You can create a safe room that the monsters won't be able to get inside. I see. That's amazing. How are you able to find all this time out with the short time researching? Twilight asked, astonished, amazed at his work. Indeed I have, Magus smiled, walking back towards Twilight, and I still have a little bit more research to do, so I am going to remain here in this safe room until I've finished it. I see, Twilight softly said, murmured to herself, thinking that passed through her head. She had just found herself a safe room, a room that would prevent any kind of monster attack. She couldn't stay here for long. Her friends needed her, and she needed to find the princess. However, there was something in that safe room that could do for her. Magus, Twilight spoke suddenly, causing the stallion to tilt his head curiously. I'm going back to look outside for my friends and Princess Celestia. Are you going to be staying here and studying? But of course, Magus smiled, adjusting his glasses once more, giving that strange grin of his. I love finding answers. I'll be here for a while at it. Good. Then, can I please ask you to watch my assistant Spike for me? Twilight pointed at the baby dragon with her hoof. What? Spike asked in shock. Sudden a proposal. Twilight, what are you doing? You need me with you. Spike, please. She looked over at her assistant before looking at Magus. Will you be willing to do that for me? But of course, Magus smiled with a creepy smile. Anything for a wonderful Miss Sparkle. Twilight, no, I want to go with you, Spike cried out, clinging onto Twilight's leg. Twilight sighed softly and sat down on the ground, holding Spike closer to her. She pressed his head up against her chest so he could hear her heartbeat. Spike then looked up at her worriedly as she smiled down at him. Listen, Spike, it's dangerous out there. Those creatures don't show any mercy. They'll rip you to shreds if they get the chance. Twilight spoke gravely, yet comfortably. I know that, but if you're going to go out there, that means they're going to come after you too, and I have to be there to protect you. Twilight, Spike cried out, clinging harder to Twilight. Twilight lifted a hoof, wrapped it around the baby dragon's body, closing it in her eye as she hugged him. Spike, listen, I can protect myself. You seem to save me a lot. I can avoid the monsters and save my own life much easier if I don't have to constantly protect you. Twilight opened her eyes and lifted her head, Spike looking up to her eye as they began to form at the edges of his. I won't be putting myself into any unintentional harm, and I'll stop at anything that plans to hurt me. I won't let those things get to me, but I have to go out and find the others. Twilight had put both her hooves on her shoulders and lowered her head down to look at him level in the eyes. Do you trust to keep my word, Spike? Spike hesitated, not wanting to be separated from the lavender unicorn, but her words spoke true. If he continued to stay with her, he'd be the liability more than he would be an aid. I do, Twilight. Spike then wrapped his arms around Twilight's neck. I do trust you, and you better come back for me. I won't forgive you if you die on me. I won't, Spike, I promise you. Twilight hugged the baby dragon close to her. They sat there for a while, just enjoying each other's embrace. Well, Muggus spoke up, finally causing the two to slowly break out of their hug. If you're going to head back out there, then maybe this will help you. His horn lit up, and from his pocket in his sweater, he pulled out a strange key. He levitated over to Twilight, who held it out in her hoof, the key gently falling onto it. I found it back there, but have no use for it since I'll be researching. Perhaps you'll find a use for it out there. Thank you, Magus. Twilight nodded her head, vanishing the key with her magic. Thank you for everything. Don't mention it, Magus flashed his creepy smile, before turning his head back to the books. Twilight then stood up and headed back for the library. You're going to come back for me, you got that? Spike said, giving Twilight a soft glare out of fear and worry. I do, Twilight smiled back at the baby dragon. The two looked at each other for a long period of time, before Twilight opened the door to the back room and exited, leaving her number one assistant behind.